When you think of a city, a bustling metropolis filled with big businesses, beautiful landmarks, and massive skyscrapers probably comes to mind. There are some cities, however, that's been left almost completely abandoned. Eerie and desolate, a sign of a time long past. Here are the top 15 largest abandoned cities on Earth. Number 15. Krakau, Italy. As far as abandoned places go, few are as scenic as Krakau, Italy. Located in the southern Italian province of Basilicata, it was founded all the way back in 540 AD and has a striking appearance due to it having been built on a 400-meter tall cliff. Built in such a location so that the town could defend itself from potential invaders, said defense mechanism worked well 1,500 years ago, yet it eventually led to the city's downfall. This is because Krakau eventually became extremely vulnerable to natural disasters, and various landslides led to large amounts of damage being dealt to it. These landslides ultimately became so severe that in 1963 the Italian government forced out all of Krakau's residents, having them instead relocate to the nearby town of Krakau-Peschiera. Since then it has become a popular tourist attraction and film location, with movies as iconic as The Passion of Christ and Christ Stopped at Iboli having been filmed there. Number 14. Thames Town, China. Generally speaking, copies are usually far worse than the originals, and Thames Town in China is a prime example of this. Built in order to house overflow people from Shanghai, it was built to model Victorian-era London, as it features cobbled streets, Victorian terraces, corner shops, and red telephone boxes. Yet despite its charming appearance, it hasn't been very palatable to Shanghai's residents, as despite being designed to hold 10,000 people, it currently remains mostly empty. However, considering that Shanghai is a city that's certainly not on the decline, we're sure people will be forced to move there sooner rather than later. Number 13. Kangbashi District, Ordos City, China. While most city districts are busy, vibrant, and of course full of people, Ordos City's business district of Kangbashi is anything but. Located in China's northern region of Inner Mongolia, construction began in 2003. Yet despite it having a capacity to hold up to 300,000 people, as of 2010 it only had a population of about 20 to 30,000. And since then the population has only grown slightly. As a result, despite having massive residential and office skyscrapers and high-tech facilities, it's still a very quiet place to live in. Number 12. Kennecott, United States. The town that officially holds the title as being the northernmost on this list is Kennecott. Located far up north in the snowy state of Alaska, it's notable for having produced about $200 million worth of copper ore between 1911 and 1938, which today would be worth about $3 billion. However, in 1938 the mines officially closed down, making Kennecott a veritable ghost town. Yet since then it's been incorporated into the Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve, which is the largest national park in the United States, and as a result, it's seen a steady stream of tourists over the years. Number 11. Kayakkoy, Turkey. World War I was easily one of the most brutal conflicts in history, but we'd think you'd agree that few towns felt its effects as strongly as Kayakkoy, Turkey. Built in the 1700s, it's located in southwestern Turkey, yet for years had a sizable Greek population. However, once World War I came around, the Ottoman Turks began persecuting the Greeks, and this came to a head in 1923, when a population exchange between the two countries caused Greeks living there to be forced to evacuate, causing the town to quickly become abandoned. It has since become a small-scale tourist site. Number 10. Oradour-sur-Glane, France. While Oradour-sur-Glane was certainly never a large city, it stands apart for having one of the most tragic tales on this list. Occupied by the Germans during World War II, it entered the bad books of the Nazis when in 1944 it was reported that highly decorated SS officer Helmut Kampf had been killed by resistance fighters from the town. As a result, SS officer Adolf Dieckmann decided that revenge was in order, and thus marched on the town with several SS troops, forcing the men into a barn and women and children into a church. Both groups were brutally killed by the soldiers due to a mix of gunshot and burn wounds, leading to a total death toll of 642. Almost every single citizen of the town was murdered on that day. Therefore, after the war's conclusions, President Charles de Gaulle ordered that the burned-out ruins of the old town be left untouched as a monument to the victims. As a result, with the exception of a museum, the site remains both untouched and uninhabited to this day. Number 9. Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. While technically not an abandoned city, a trip through this massive metropolis will make you soon realize that it's on the emptier side. You see, Ashgabat, which is the capital of the former Soviet state of Turkmenistan, is very impressive at first glance, holding the Guinness World Record for having been built with more marble than any other city on the planet. It's chock full of massive monuments, spectacular statues, and brilliant buildings, including a large mosque and major sports complex that was used for the 2017 Asian Indoor Games. Yet despite all of this glamour, the city remains nearly empty. This is because rather than invest in economic projects, the government has consistently used its massive oil and gas revenues to make Ashgabat a display of wealth in an otherwise impoverished nation. As a result, they have consistently evicted people from their homes without compensation and stifled the free press in order to allow these building projects to go through, despite the country's GDP per capita being less than $7,000. When you then further consider that Ashgabat is considered to be one of the most expensive places to live in the world, thanks to Turkmenistan's sky-high inflation and lack of access to even the most basic products, it becomes painfully clear why this city has essentially become a massive ghost town. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Pripyat, Ukraine. While war, the economy, or central planning are the most common reasons for cities being abandoned, Pripyat stands apart for being abandoned largely thanks to a nuclear disaster. That's because on April 26 of 1986, a catastrophic meltdown took place inside reactor number 4 at the nearby nuclear power plant at Chernobyl. This spewed flames and radioactive material into the skies over Pripyat, which was a nearby city built to house the plant's scientists and workers. As a result, the city's 49,000 inhabitants were evacuated within 36 hours. And in order to ensure that no one went back, the Soviet government established a 29-kilometer exclusion zone around both Pripyat and the power plant. Yet despite this, many former residents have had major health problems related to their nuclear exposure despite being in the radioactive city for less than 2 days. And most incredibly of all, there are still some that refuse to leave Pripyat, even after the nuclear meltdown, with this population constituting about 400 people to this day. However, despite this massive mess rendering Pripyat inhospitable for at least the next few centuries, authorities have deemed it safe enough for tourists to venture inside of it for short-term visits. As a result, practically anyone can purchase a guided tour into the abandoned city today, so long as they're willing to shell out about $100 to $500 per person. Therefore, if you're planning on visiting Eastern Europe anytime soon, we highly suggest putting this spectacular city onto your bucket list. Number 7. Kolmanscop, Namibia. Mining towns tend to have a pretty finite lifespan, and Kolmanscop is certainly no exception. Located in the southwest corner of the southwestern African country of Namibia, it was founded in 1908 after a nearby railway worker found a large diamond in the area, leading to a massive diamond mining boom. German laborers came in droves to the town, which eventually grew to not only have amenities such as a hospital, ballroom, theater, sport hall, and casino, but also the first X-ray station in the southern hemisphere, and the first tram in Africa. However, in 1928, a much larger deposit with much easier to find diamonds was found 260 kilometers south of Kolmanscop. And by World War II, the Kolmanscop mines began to become severely depleted, leading to the town being completely abandoned in 1956 due to the natural forces of the desert. Kolmanscop is now covered in knee-deep high sand. Yet best of all, it can still be visited to this day, however, because it's located within a restricted area of the Namib Desert known as the Skyscrapers. Visitors must obtain a permit before venturing inside. Number 6. North Brother Island, United States. Although technically not a town, this abandoned location certainly has much more unsettling history than many of the other places on this list. That's because this island, which is located on New York's East River, is infamous for being the location of a hospital for people with highly contagious diseases. Known as Riverside Hospital, it opened in 1885, and it mainly housed people with diseases such as typhoid, tuberculosis, and smallpox, with Typhoid Mary Mallon being its most famous patient. Then, after being briefly closed throughout World War II, it was used to house wartime veterans, and in the 1950s it was then repurposed as a treatment center for adolescent drug addicts. However, in 1963 the hospital closed its doors for good, and ever since the island has been abandoned and off-limits to visitors. Nowadays, it's instead being used as a wildlife sanctuary. However, there is research and area planning currently being put in place to perhaps reopen the island to the public in the near future. Number 5. Famagusta, Cyprus. If you were to turn back the clock to the Middle Ages, you'd see a Famagusta that is far different than the version of it that's present today. That's because during this time period, it was the island's most important port city, as it was a gateway to trade with the extremely rich ports of the Levant. However, since then Cyprus has experienced a lot of turmoil, and in response to a failed Greek coup in 1974, Turkish troops invaded the city that same year. In particular, they annexed the Varosha district of the city, which not only led to the expulsion of all the Greek Cypriots inhabiting it, but the sectioning off of the city with barbed wire and widespread looting by the Turks. Thankfully, since then, the situation has largely de-escalated, and today Cyprus is in a state of uneasy peace between both Greek and Turkish factions on the island. However, in spite of this, the de facto Turkish government of northern Cyprus has forbidden the old Greek Cypriots to re-enter, not only disallowing them from living in their homes, but even forbidding them to reclaim their valuables. The reason for this are extremely complicated, although factors such as security and the commercial importance of the city have all been cited. Yet until a completely unified Cyprus becomes a reality, this will likely remain the status quo. However, in 2017, northern Cyprus made a surprising move when they opened Varosha's world-class beaches to Turkish Cypriots and Turkish citizens. And in 2019, they took this one step further by announcing that Varosha's formerly world-class hotels would be reopening by the end of 2020. However, with many of the specifics still unclear, only time will tell who will be allowed to enter. Number 4. Plymouth, Montserrat. If you've never heard of the island territory of Montserrat before, we wouldn't blame you. Located in the southeastern Caribbean, Montserrat is an overseas territory of the United Kingdom, and after Plymouth became its first European settlement in 1632, it remained largely forgotten by the world at large. Yet a few hundred years later, its existence would come to an abrupt end. In July of 1995, a series of large eruptions at Soufriere Hills volcano, which had been inactive for centuries, sent pyroclastic flows and ash across the southern portion of the island. As a result, by December of that year, the entire town was completely evacuated, with residents being allowed to come back in 1997. However, in June of 1997, the volcano began erupting once again, with these eruptions leading to a permanent evacuation of most of Plymouth's citizens soon afterwards. Luckily for the Montserrat Islanders, this evacuation had been well-timed, because between August 4th and August 8th of that year, a further series of large eruptions destroyed approximately 80% of the town, burying it under 1.4 meters of ash. This hot material burned many of the buildings, making habitation nearly impossible for many of the residents, and causing the British Navy to intervene and evacuate those who had remained in the city. As a result, a large portion of the island's residents ended up moving back to the mainland United Kingdom, and in turn the island became economically depressed due to both its population decrease and the destruction of most of its economically profitable businesses. Nowadays, the southern area of the island continues to be deemed as an exclusion zone, as volcanic activity in the area has not yet paused. Yet if you'd like to visit, there are tours that organize excursions to this exclusion zone. However, considering that the volcano is still active, you'd definitely be entering at your own risk. Number 3. Hashima Island, Japan. As we alluded to before, mining towns usually aren't places with a very long lifespan, and Hashima Island in Japan was certainly no exception. You see, after a coal mining colony was established on the island in 1887, workers and their families began to flock to the island. Yet after only a very short period of time, the entire colony was bought out by Mitsubishi, and it would soon become an extremely profitable venture, with this being made even more apparent after Korean and Chinese prisoners of war were forced to work in these mines throughout World War II. Yet even after the war, Hashima Island still continued to grow, and at its height in the 1950s, it housed 5,200 residents in a space of less than a square kilometer, making it one of the most densely packed places on Earth. Yet in 1974, Mitsubishi closed down their mine, leading to the island being abandoned almost immediately. As a result, the island remains in a ruined state, as its concrete apartments, schools, barbershops, and swimming pools all sit empty. Yet despite this abandonment, Hashima Island has been able to stir up more than its fair share of controversy. The first such controversy came in 2009, when Japan nominated the island to be a UNESCO World Heritage Site, due to it being an important factor in spurring the Meiji Industrial Revolution in Japan. However, South and North Korea both opposed this addition, as they felt that the island's legacy as a prisoner of war camp made it unworthy of a UNESCO title. Yet, to both their benefit, South Korea and Japan did eventually reach a compromise where Japan agreed to acknowledge the island's dark past to tourists, leading to South Korea withdrawing its opposition. As a result, in 2015, it was officially named as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Best of all, if you'd like to visit Hashima Island, you can certainly do so. That's because the Japanese government opened the island to visitors in 2009, and as a result, it can now be seen for a price that's equivalent to about $35 to $50. Therefore, if you'd like to visit one of the most unique islands in the Japanese archipelago, then Hashima Island is your dream destination. Number 2. Bodie, California. If you're the type that enjoys an old spaghetti western, then chances are that you've heard of Bodie, California. Located in the eastern half of the state on the border with Nevada, the area was first settled after small amounts of gold were found in 1859 and became a full-on town after large deposits of gold were found in 1876. This convinced an influx of prospectors to make the trek over to the town in order to try their luck, and by 1879 Bodie had a population of about 7,000 to 10,000 people and a total of 2,000 buildings. However, this influx also began to give it a reputation for being a quote-unquote sea of sin, and the town became infamous for its various shootouts, gambling rings, and brothels. Yet the gold deposits and Wild West shenanigans couldn't last forever. In fact, by 1910, the town only had a few hundred people, and in 1942, the last mine was closed, with everyone moving out by war's end in 1945. As a result, it sat for a couple of decades as a completely abandoned ghost town. However, in 1961, it was designated as a National Historical Landmark, and in 1962, the California State Legislature authorized the creation of Bodie State Historic Park. This led to the 170 remaining buildings being maintained in a state of arrested decay, meaning that while not having been restored but having instead been protected from decomposing further. And although this means that no one can live in Bodie any longer, in a sense it's now far more popular than it was during its boom years. That's because to this day it receives about 200,000 visitors annually and is easily one of the most popular ghost towns in the world. Number 1. Fordlandia, Brazil. While the Ford Motors Company may have made massive strides in improving the lives of workers across America, in Brazil, the company was less than successful. You see, Henry Ford first began to look to Brazil when he wanted to source his own rubber for his tires, as he was growing tired of having to pay for it from the British firms that had a monopoly over the resource. This caused him to invest about $20 million, or about $290 million today, into creating the equivalent of an American working-class town on the Tabajos River, which runs right through the famed Amazon jungle. Founded in 1928 and called Fordlandia, he created amenities such as an American-style bungalows, swimming pools, hotels, and even a golf course in the hope that his Brazilian workers would grow accustomed to this type of community. However, to Ford's misfortune, the project became a disaster almost immediately. The first major issue was that there were no roads connecting Fordlandia to the rest of Brazil. Therefore, the only way to enter the town was by the Tabajos River, which proved to be a logistical nightmare. Then the American planners, who had little knowledge of tropical rubber cultivation, made the mistake of growing all the rubber trees close together rather than space them apart, which caused them to quickly succumb to tree funguses, disease, and various crop-eating critters. Yet worst of all, the Americans managed to infuriate their Brazilian workers by imposing strict sets of rules that include bans on alcohol, tobacco, and of all things, soccer. Causing the workers to revolt and the crop harvest to fail, Ford decided to move 40 kilometers downriver to a more fertile site. And while this site did end up producing some rubber, it was around this time that synthetic rubber became easy to mass produce. Making natural rubber to become obsolete, this caused Henry Ford's grandson, Henry Ford II, to sell all of his Brazilian land back to the Brazilian government for pennies on the dollar in 1945, losing millions in the process. As a result, the town now sits abandoned far in the depths of the Amazon, and still receives curious visitors from time to time. That's all we have for you today, everyone, and thank you all for watching. Let us know in the comments down below which abandoned city you might want to visit one day. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and smash that notification button so you never miss out on any of our latest content. Until next time.